Welcome back everyone, this is going to be my full Loki episode 5 video. There were so many Easter eggs and references, we'll break it all down. If you're brand new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to get all the videos. We're doing a Disney Plus giveaway for memberships. All you have to do to enter is be a subscriber and leave your favorite Easter egg from the episode on the video. There are so many. Careful for spoilers, if you have not seen the episode yet, we'll be talking about everything. So everybody hop in the Thanos copter and we'll start at the beginning of the episode and I'll number all these Easter eggs and WTF moments as we go along just to stay organized. Starting with the title, the episode was titled Journey into Mystery, which is a reference to the Marvel comic book Journey into Mystery, where Thor and the Loki character debuted for the first time. Loki's first appearance was in Journey into Mystery number 85. I also think there might be some clues and foreshadowing in this issue to what's going on with the real main villain of the series that I'll talk about when we get to that part of the episode. As you'll notice, classic Loki is wearing the same costume because he's meant to be a version of that original Jack Kirby looking Loki. But the actual episode starts with the camera rotating around at the TVA with the frame upside down, just showing you how things truly have gone upside down metaphorically since the end of episode 4, with the camera pushing through the wall of the Timekeeper's chamber and through the broken head of that middle Timekeeper robot. It continues into the landscape where all the erased Lokis, the buildings, the vehicles, the ships, the other objects go when they get erased by the TVA hunters, which they explain is the Void. You see, the Avengers Tower actually does not say Avengers or Stark Industries on it. You see Kang on it, Q-E-N-G, which is a reference to the company that's owned by Nathaniel Richards, aka Kang the Conqueror. So just yet another Kang the Conqueror Easter egg in the series. And if you look at the side of the bus too, there's actually the name of one of the editors of the series on the side. It says Callum Ross. He's just one of the editors for, I think it was episode 4, or maybe it was episode 5. A lot of times when you see people's names on stuff in the background, they're names of people that worked on the show. Then we pick up immediately with our Loki in the moments of the post-credit scene where all the other variant Lokis come to tell him, we need to go or you're gonna die. Classic Loki tells him the giant storm, which visually kind of looks a little bit like the Black Winter, is actually Alioth, which is a big comic book character that I'll explain in a second. I've already talked a little bit about all these versions of Loki. Classic Loki, played by Richard E Grant, Kid Loki, played by Jack Veal, who's actually still alive at the end of the episode, as far as we know. I'm hoping they kept him around because they want to bring him on for Young Avengers stuff that they're slowly setting up in the background of the Disney Plus series. Then there's Daobia Opar-Reyes, Boastful Loki with the hammer, and Aligator Loki. There was a lot of really solid Alligator Loki moments. He was a champ during this episode. We talk about the superior Loki on the series. Alligator Loki should be the superior Loki. Changed my mind. The way they clarify Alioth is basically this entity that exists in the void and just eats things to gain more mass. It eats matter and energy, so there's basically no way to kill it, and you can't fight it physically like you would normally fight a villain. That's why they have to enchant it at the end of the episode, more of a psychic attack. But we'll get to that part in a second. There's so much other stuff to explain. Alioth has this big comic book connection to Kang, so it's basically a temporal being that exists in a limbo state, is the only creature in all of existence that Kang is afraid of that has more time travel powers than he does. During the comics, when the Avengers were forced to fight Alioth, they actually got help from Kang, who actually gave them Tempest, another immortal time travel being from a limbo dimension, who was able to power himself up enough to fight Alioth into a stalemate for all eternity. So even then, the Avengers weren't able to kill Alioth, they just fought him to a stalemate permanently. That was what Boastful Loki was referencing when he called Alioth a living Tempest. Comic book Tempest. Also, because Ravonna Renslayer, big part of the episode, there was a comic book version of Ravonna that accidentally let Alioth free. You notice that it actually has a face, and it seems like a very wolf-like face. I'll talk about that in a second too, because I think the episode is littered not only with Easter eggs that are really cool, but also clues in dialogue that sort of foreshadow who the real main villain is. Remember, there's only 6 episodes, they have to wrap this plot up really fast, so I think a lot of the conversations that people have, particularly Mobius during the episode, are really important for decoding who's behind all this. But back at the TVA, Sylvie is still busy fighting Ravonna Renslayer, who takes her TemPad, and then obviously they go back and forth quite a bit, with Ravonna trying to stall her long enough so that the TVA hunters can show up, and using Miss Minutes to also help her stall, like, please pull up the files on the end of time. Oh no, it's taken a while to pull up those files. But the way they explain later in the episode, Ravonna was not lying when she said she also wanted to find out who was really behind this, but the very antagonistic way that they're presenting her, like she has that big argument with Hunter B-15, is that she doesn't want to burn down the TVA, she actually wants to uphold the TVA, like she wants to keep its status quo, and it sounds like she's trying to stop Sylvie from killing whoever's behind this, like she wants to find them and warn them. As a lot of us suspected, she did know the truth about people getting erased and being sent to the void. The way she explains it is that she says it's impossible for the TVA to completely erase or reset everything from a branch timeline. So some things from those alternate timelines get transferred to the void, which is where all the objects and the people come from. And as far as they've thought before, the void was supposed to be the end of all time, although that winds up being a lie too. Like, there is a place that's even further at the actual end of time, which is basically this rock with the black citadel on it. The void is like the place right before that on the timeline. Even though the way Ravonna explains it, they don't completely understand what's going on with Alioth. They just know that things don't come back. But that's the whole idea. Whoever's behind the TVA created Alioth to get rid of all that stuff, to basically be the trash compactor for the void, which is where all the trash they couldn't delete wound up going. And the reason they explain there's so many Lokis that are alive here, like all these other many versions of Loki, is because they survive, whereas other regular people do not. Like, you see the ship on the USS Eldridge, all those sailors, they get eaten in like 2 seconds when Alioth shows up. So just to be clear, Ravonna knows about the secret of the void, but she does not know who's really behind this inside that citadel at the actual end of time. And she didn't know about the actual end of time either. But all this talk about the end of time just made me think of Doctor Who, The End of Time with David Tennant. Ravonna also explains that the official dogma that was passed down, which they now know is a lie, was that the Timekeepers were transforming the void at the end of time into a utopia. Although all that's out the window, but like I said, even though Ravonna knows about the lie now, she doesn't want to burn the TVA down like everyone else. It's like, no, we have to keep this going, it's important. Like, she has completely drunk the Kool-Aid, and this is meant to be an origin story for her, just like it is for some of these other characters, like Sylvie, for instance. So I think this is setting her up for a really big villain arc in the MCU in the future. She has so many deep ties to Kang the Conqueror. We know that he's going to be the main antagonist of Ant-Man 3, so I think that's just sort of putting her on a collision course for that character eventually, if she doesn't already have some association with him that we don't know about. Back in the void, we meet back up with a team of Lokis that are leading our Loki across the landscape. You also see an old sailing ship. I believe this is supposed to be a big Easter egg, but I'm not sure which sailing ship this is meant to be. Next to the very Star Trek Enterprise looking spaceship saucer section here. Just meant to highlight how the void is a dumping ground for all points in the timeline, past, present, and future. At pretty much every point in the episode, anytime they're outside and the camera pans around the landscape, it's littered with Easter eggs in the background. I'm sure you could zoom and enhance for days on all this footage and find more stuff in the distant background. They walk amongst the ruins of a bunch of large statues. You can't really see what the heads are for these statues. All these rare birds that are running around seem very familiar, but I can't place them specifically. So if you think you know what these birds are meant to be, just write it below in the comments. Kid Loki pulls his sword on our Loki to get him to shut up, and his sword is actually a really big deep cut from the comics too, because he winds up giving it to Loki later, the flaming sword. I believe it's pronounced Levitine. It's Loki's ancestral blade, which he's capable of summoning using his powers the same way that Thor summons Mjolnir. It appeared in the comics for the first time in Thor number 368, just a couple months after Frog Thor appeared for the first time, which was 365. We see Frog Thor a little bit later in the episode, so I'll point him out in a second. He was one of the cooler Easter eggs in the episode. But now Loki has his ancestral blade. Remember, they're all Lokis, so if it's Kid Loki's ancestral blade, technically it's also our Loki's ancestral blade. But in the Old Norse language, Levitine just means damaged twig. You could think of that as a metaphor for the Loki character, because classic Loki talks about how they're all fundamentally damaged, and anytime they try to fix themselves, the TVA stops them, arrests them, and tries to erase them, sends them to the void. You also notice Kid Loki's got a toaster in his backpack there, but you have to remember that they've been scavenging things for their special bunker. That's where all their cool stuff comes from. Our Loki asked them some of the early standard questions too, so they get past some of the logic, like why can't we just create another Nexus event? Because the TVA apparently does not care at all what happens in the void. Then Kid Loki claims that his Nexus event that got him pruned was actually killing his version of Thor, which might be a comic book Easter egg for Kid Loki in the comics when he was starting to piss Thor off. Thor strung him up by his neck and dared him to kill him. So in the comics, he did not do that because Kid Loki was kind of a good version of Loki. But I guess that they're saying that this version of Kid Loki did wind up killing his Thor when faced with a similar situation. Then they walk past the Thanos copter, one of the greatest Easter eggs from the episode. It even says Thanos on the tail of the helicopter. Also, if you look here, you can see a giant version of Yellow Jacket's helmet from the first Ant-Man movie. You kind of wonder what he did to get him sent here. They also walk by what seems like an undetonated nuclear bomb, marking the entrance to their underground shelter. You also notice later in the episode when they open the hatch, the runes on top seem like the Loki sigil with some Asgardian writing on it. It might just be enchantments to help protect the place. But then, as they travel down through the many layers of dirt, like the camera pans down so you see what's buried in the dirt, and there's all kinds of Easter eggs, what seems like an infinite amount of lunch trays for some reason. You see a whole version of Mjolnir just waiting for one of these Lokis to become worthy and call it. Then there's a jar with Frog Thor in it, in his costume, banging on it, trying to get out, kind of screaming in frustration, with T365 on it. That's a reference to the issue where he debuted, Thor number 365. Like I said, a couple issues before, they debuted Loki's ancestral blade that he gets at the end of the episode. Maybe if he's lucky, Frog Thor will be able to use that version of Mjolnir to escape, if he's still worthy. But when they enter the actual shelter, it looks like the ruins of an old bowling alley with just a whole bunch of junk that they've collected. Boastful Loki taunts our Loki, asking him if he left his glorious purpose back at the TVA, and when Loki says something like that, he's referencing Sylvie. We get a better look at Kid Loki's throne, and Boastful Loki actually explains that Kid Loki is technically the boss of the Lokis in their little faction here. They have a Polybius arcade machine, which is a big urban legend. I've already explained that in a couple of my videos. It's a really cool detail in the episode. There's all kinds of other odd junk, but they also have a Williams Space Mission pinball machine from 1976. And Kid Loki's throne actually looks like it's repurposed from an old Santa Claus Christmas throne because of all the candy canes and the Santa that's sitting next to it. It does look like something that a little kid would pick as a throne. Then back at the TVA, Ravonna tells this big lie about a prototype void ship designed to withstand temporal forces at the end of time. I don't know if this is meant to be an Easter egg for something from the comics. It could be reference to that, but the whole idea was that she was just stalling for time so that the hunters could show up. So a lot of what she was saying was meant to be lies. But they do try to call up the files that Loki was trying to access back during episode 2. The librarian told him those are off limits. Like, he wanted to know about the beginning of time, the creation of the TVA. He wanted to know about the end of time, but she wouldn't give him any of that. Later in the episode, Ravonna does get Miss Minutes to start looking up those files, so they actually do have them. Ravonna also makes a Wizard of Oz reference, saying that they're going to find the man behind the curtain. I've been talking about that the last couple of episodes. Just because the way they've been playing a lot of the series, setting up these big fake-outs and twists, it seems like it'll be a very Wizard of Oz style reveal. There are a couple other big clues during the episode, I think, that help foreshadow who that person is going to be. After they reveal the double cross, and she says that she'll put Sylvie in a time loop prison if she gives up the special red portals that Loki got dumped in during episode 4, the one good memory that Sylvie says she has sounds like it's meant to be when she was with Loki and they were falling in love on Lamentis 1, just based on the way the producers and the writers talk about the relationship arc that they have during the series. But as a lot of people guessed, she actually does wind up using a wand to zap herself into the void. The prevailing theory was that she would let herself get pruned somehow so that she would just automatically go to the void where Loki got sent. We go back to the bunker and they start panning around as all the Lokis are just chilling out, having some of that Roxen brand box wine. I'm sure it tastes terrible, but apparently Alligator Loki really loves it. Boastful Loki, true to his name, boasts that he defeated Iron Man, Captain America, and collected all 6 Infinity Stones. Like he's saying during his version of Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame, he defeated all the Avengers and took all the Infinity Stones. But then all the other Lokis call bullcrap on him. I love how Alligator Loki is the first one to call him out. To which he responds, saying that Alligator Loki's Nexus event was eating the wrong neighbor's cat, who proceeds to jump out and bite the hell out of him, just foreshadowing him biting off President Loki's hand. Also foreshadowing the big battle royale between all the Lokis later in the episode. Just the idea that all these Lokis are never gonna all get along with each other because they're such narcissists. Then Classic Loki explains his backstory, saying that everything up to the events of Avengers Infinity War was the exact same for him mostly, but instead of sacrificing himself like our original Loki did, he says that he just cast a perfect illusion, fooling Thanos into thinking he snapped his neck, then hid from everyone, including Thor, and just kind of floated off into space by himself until he could go quietly retire on a planet remotely where nobody would find him. The way he explains it though, he was basically running away from his pain. Like he said, everywhere I went, I only found pain, so I tried to find somewhere where that wouldn't happen. So he was basically running away from his problems, which is a big call to action for our Loki, sort of setting up his hero arc by the end of the episode where he sort of stands his ground with Sylvie. Also with a little help from a redeemed Classic Loki, who himself gets a pep talk from Mobius. But the way he explains it, Classic Loki says that he got arrested by the TVA because he eventually got lonely, eventually in his old age, and wanted to see Thor again, wanted to see everyone else he knew, and as he stepped off the planet, the TVA showed up immediately to prune him. But Classic Loki's story is also some foreshadowing, I think, for our Loki's arc and for what's going on with the villain of the series. So the head writer, Michael Waldron, talked about this guiding principle for Loki's character. The reason why he does everything, all this mischief, all these bad things that he does, is because he's terrified of being alone. That was also what he was talking about during episode 4 when he was trying to get Sif to stop kicking him in the nuts during the time loop prison. It wasn't a lie, he was telling the truth about that. They make a whole bunch of jokes about daggers, saying that they're super cool, but then classic Loki sort of sets up his big illusion at the end of the episode, claiming that they hurt their abilities as Lokis to develop more powerful magic, which I think also plays into the idea of Loki using the enchantment abilities that Sylvie has at the end of the episode too. Like, you can do this too because you're Loki, just like me. Like, Loki realizes, oh, we're capable of being more powerful than people think that we are. Classic Loki also jokes that it would be terrifying to meet a female version of themselves, just referencing Sylvie. Then as our Loki opens the hatch to leave, he's faced with President Loki and all the other Lokis that are part of his faction. I've already done a video about some of these other versions of Loki, but they're basically just meant to be wildly different marauders. Like later in the episode, there's a reference to different bands that you run into in the void. Like, well, either they're cannibals, they're marauders, or they're marauding cannibals. This faction of Lokis led by President Loki just seems more like marauders. But then we jump to Sylvie on an old bus in the void, in the ruins of a bunch of old classic cars all over the place. Alioth consumes the bus just as she escapes. Then as Sylvie tries to enchant Alioth, she actually gets a vision of what lies beyond the void, giving her the idea for the end of the episode. She sees the Citadel, the door that we saw from the earlier trailers. She sees that it's sitting on an asteroid next to the sacred timeline. We've seen that in all the earlier trailers, but they hid the Citadel on top of the rock. We just saw the rock itself in the sacred timeline. But she also sees this vision of a glowing bright light at the top of this tower, which seems like it's the source of the power that's behind everything that whoever's behind this is using. I also think it's a callback to the depiction of Loki on the issue where he debuted for the first time, standing on top of that tower, shouting down at Thor, trying to prove that he's more powerful. But then confirming all our theories, just as she's about to be consumed completely, Mobius drives up to save her in a skinny pizza delivery car. Then as they drive away in the landscape, you can see the Sphinx, you can see the Great Pyramid of Egypt on one side, then off in the distance over here on the right, I believe this is meant to be the Greek Acropolis. Like I said, everywhere, in every direction, all over the landscape, Easter eggs everywhere as far as the eye can see. Then they confirm that President Loki's group is a totally different enemy faction of Loki's inside the Void. They say they prefer to be thought of as snakes instead of wolves. That's meant to be a callback to the wolf's ears, wolf's teeth are near, the Asgardian saying from earlier in the series. Also, the snakes is a reference to Loki turning himself into a snake, like in Thor's story from Thor Ragnarok when they were children. You could also think of it as a reference to the Midgard serpent, giant snake, which in Norse mythology is Loki's middle child. You could also think as the wolf reference as being a callback to Fenris wolf or Fenrir wolf in Norse mythology, which is also one of Loki's children. Young Sylvie's toys, the little toy of the wolf, was also meant to be a reference to that. They have a big joke about Loki's betraying each other right and left because just betrayal is a big trope of Loki's stories, with Boastful Loki claiming that he betrayed Kid Loki in order to take his Santa throne for himself. But after which President Loki then double-crosses Boastful Loki, starting their big brawl. Alligator Loki bites his hand off, which is hilarious. Like I said, Alligator Loki is the superior Loki. You see our Loki kind of trying to dodge everything and just throw his hands up in disgust like, I can't believe these people. Boss tier move, Kid Loki just throws Alligator Loki at one of the other Lokis, but then sort of setting up the big twist at the end of the episode, classic Loki creates a perfect illusion to distract President Loki's men while they use one of the portals to escape to the surface. Then as they're walking away, behind them you see the ruins of some massive spaceship behind them. It's not clear which spaceship this is, so if you think you know what this is a reference to, just write it below in the comments. Then everyone heads for Alioth at the same time, they all sort of converge on the same place. Kid Loki whips out a rift detector that he uses for detecting when stuff winds up coming into the void when alternate timelines get dumped here. That leads them to the USS Eldridge, so I've already explained this before, but the USS Eldridge was a real-life US Navy ship that they were using to test cloaking technology like Star Trek Klingon cloaking technology, completely vanish it from human view and radar detection for a short period. And the urban legend goes that they were successful, but it disappeared briefly amidst this green smoke and sailors got fused to the bulkhead. There were all kinds of theories about it not disappearing, it actually traveling through time, so this is them just sort of playing on that idea. But they use the Eldritch to remind you why you can't fight it physically, because they use all their giant guns on the ship to try and fire at it, and because Alioth absorbs all matter and energy, it just eats all the stuff that they fire at it. Just setting up the concept that they have to take Sylvie's approach of a psychic attack and chanting it. They also show you what it looks like when Alioth eats something, and he basically picks the ship dry, like eating chicken off the bone, leaving nothing but the bits of the framework. Back in the TVA, Ravonna Renslayer sort of sets up more of her villain arc against Loki and Sylvie at the end of the series, like she's trying to also get to this place at the end of time. She'll probably successfully get there as well in the finale at some point, but not to stop whoever's behind this, but to prevent Sylvie and Loki from killing them. Then there's this really interesting conversation that Mobius has with classic Loki that I think helps also foreshadow what's really going on with the main villain of the series. So they just start with this funny argument about whether or not Alligator Loki is really a Loki. Mobius claims that he has no memory of the TVA ever arresting an Alligator Loki. He says maybe he could just be pulling a long con, but that would make him even more of a Loki. And they say when it comes to Lokis, there's always a game within the game, which I think is a big clue also to what's happening with the person in the Citadel at the end of time beyond Alioth. The game within the game, because it's almost like Loki and Sylvie travel into Alioth through this portal to get to the Citadel, like the game literally and metaphorically inside the game of the Void. Like Alioth was the guard dog, protecting the entrance to the actual end of time, and because it kind of looks like a wolf, it makes you think of Fenris Wolf. So if, as Mobius says, it's always a Loki pulling a long con, games within games, all these themes of Loki's betraying other Lokis earlier in the episode, then shouldn't whoever's behind all this TVA nonsense be yet another Loki? You know, play the Agatha all along theme music. It was Loki all along. Also, you think about classic Loki's story about going to live by himself on this remote planet, and you think about this asteroid where the Citadel is basically a rock by itself at the end of time. There's nothing else that's here. So it just seems like a lot of the dialogue, a lot of the conversations, the Easter eggs are pointing towards it being some sort of Loki that's behind all of this. Then when Mobius talks about setting things right at the TVA, everyone telling the truth if he makes it back, it never being too late to change, that's what inspires classic Loki to sacrifice himself to help Sylvie and Loki enchant Alioth. Then when Loki and Sylvie are talking, having their little conversation, sort of coming to terms with their relationship, she jokes about the costumes being really uncomfortable. That's actually meant to be a real-life joke about the actors having to wear really uncomfortable costumes when they're filming. If you've ever watched Paul Bettany take off his Vision costume in real life, it is crazy how much time he has to spend in the makeup chair just to get that on. Then Loki says he won't betray Sylvie just because that's not who he is anymore. They make it sound like they're gonna really go for a relationship if they're successful in defeating whoever's behind all this. Like if they survive the finale, then they'll try to make a go of it. Then when they move to the wide shot of the landscape, off in the background on the left here, you can see the wreckage of the Dark Aster, which is Ronan's ship from the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie. They give Mobius the Tempad so that he can return to the TVA, and as he says, big callback to the first episode, burn it to the ground like Loki foretold. I'm gonna burn this place to the ground. Then Kid Loki gives his flaming sword, his ancestral blade, to our Loki. Like I said, it's a version of his ancestral blade from the comics. Then when Loki and Sylvie move to try and stop Alioth, start distracting him, stalling for time, and they start panning across the landscape, yet more Easter eggs, you notice this statue here with the three heads is actually a representation of the three-sided head of the Living Tribunal. So it's a statue of the Living Tribunal. But it's not the first time that they've referenced it in the MCU. That was the Doctor Strange movie with the staff of the Living Tribunal. And there was supposed to be an Avengers Infinity War deleted scene during the Titan fight where Doctor Strange would have taken Thanos to be judged by the Living Tribunal. They wound up getting rid of it just because it got way too complicated and it was another character that they would have had to explain. So hopefully at some point in a future movie, we'll see the actual Living Tribunal show up. Then when classic Loki turns around here, you notice behind him in the background, you can see the ruins of a S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier. I do wonder who all of these giant skeletons belong to that are littered across the landscape. When Loki and Sylvie are stalling for time, behind them, this just seems like the ruins of an oil drilling rig. And then it winds up taking classic Loki, creating a perfect illusion of the entire city of Asgard, palace and all, right down to the trees and the streets, in order to distract Alioth. His hero music also sounds like a mixture of the classic Thor theme from the Marvel movies, mixed with a little bit of the main Loki series theme music. You also notice that his version of Asgard looks a little bit different from our main version of Asgard, I think just because he's classic Jack Kirby looking Loki, like he's recreating a version of his version of Asgard. He winds up going out like a boss, sacrificing himself, screaming, glorious purpose. I absolutely love Richard E. Grant's performance in the episode as this character. He was fantastic. Hopefully someday they'll be able to bring him back. And because there's a multiverse, there's an infinite number of Lokis that you can bring back. Then Sylvie convinces our Loki that he is able to use enchantment abilities because they're the same, they're both Lokis. And the whole idea, though, you have to remember, Sylvie kind of explained how enchantment works, or at least how her version of enchantment works, is that she has to grab onto a memory of whatever it is that she's enchanting. So they're basically grabbing onto the memory of this black citadel on the rock at the end of time. And they're just using it to pacify Alioth. In the way they're presenting this, he was just sort of like the guard dog that was guarding the gateway, like a portal to the actual end of time. We see a much larger version of the Citadel that Sylvie saw in her vision earlier. Beyond it in the background, the white that you see arcing across the frame, that's meant to be a representation of the sacred timeline from all the trailers, like this white energy beam extending across space. And where all these colors sort of meet, you're looking at the actual vanishing point of the multiverse, like all timelines converging at the vanishing point. Then the only big difference they make with the credits here is that you actually see all the major Loki variants from the episode, all the ones that had speaking lines at least, added to these special shots, like someone was taking pictures of them. But I think what they're going for here is basically they're going to combine the concepts of He Who Remains in the comics, who's like the last living being left in the multiverse who created the Timekeepers, but in the comics it's an actual person, and they'll just combine that concept with possibly another Loki, like yet another Loki. But let me know in the comments, just based on all the evidence that you've seen, who do you actually think the real main villain is? Who's going to be He Who Remains, who created the TVA in this entire thing? My full Loki Episode 6 finale video will post next Wednesday just like normal. I have a couple big bonus videos that I'm working on that I'll post before then. If you have any big requests or big questions or videos that you want me to do based on this episode too, just let me know in the comments. I've got a new finale video that I'll post tomorrow. While you wait for that, click here for all my Loki episode videos, and click here for my Spider-Man No Way Home first look video for all of his brand new Spider-Man suits in the movie. There are a bunch of them. Thank you so much for watching, everyone stay safe, and I'll see you guys tonight.